हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू द लाइव सेशन। तो आज हम पढ़ेंगे एनसीईआरटी हिस्ट्री क्लास 12 का थीम 2 किंग्स, फार्मर्स एंड टाउन्स, अर्ली स्टेट्स एंड इकोनॉमिक्स 600 BC to 600 CE। तो शुरू करते हैं। There were several developments in different parts of the subcontinent during the long span of 1500 years following the end of the Harappan civilization. This was also the periods during which the Rig Veda was composed by the people living along the Indus and its tributaries. Agricultural settlement emerged in many parts of the subcontinent, including North India, the Deccan Plateau, and parts of Karnataka. Besides, there is evidence of pastoral population in the Deccan and further south. New modes of disposal of the dead, including the making of elaborate stone structure known as megaliths, emerged in the central and south India from the first millennium BCE. In many cases, the dead were buried with a rich range of iron tools and weapons. From 6th century BCE, there is evidence that there were other trends as well. Perhaps the most visible was the emergence of early states, empires, and kingdoms. Underlying these political processes were other changes, evident in the ways in which agricultural production was organized. Simultaneously, new towns appeared almost throughout the subcontinent. Historians attempted to understand this development by drawing a range of sources: inscriptions, texts, coins, and visual materials. As we will see, this is a complex process. You will also notice that these sources do not tell the entire story. Princeps and Piyadasi. Some of the most momentous developments in the Indian epigraphy took place in the 1830s. This was when James Princeps, an officer in the Mint of the East India Company, deciphered Brahmi and Kharosthi, two scripts used in earliest inscriptions and coins. He found that most of these mentioned a king referred to as Piyadasi, meaning pleasant to behold. There were a few inscriptions which also referred to the king as Asoka, one of the most famous rulers from the Buddhist text. Epigraphy is the study of inscriptions. This gave a new direction to the investigations into early Indian political history, as European and Indian scholars used inscriptions and texts composed in a variety of languages to reconstruct the lineages of major dynasties that had ruled the subcontinent. As a result, the broad contours of political history were in place by the early decades of the 20th century. Subsequently, scholars began to shift their focus to the context of political history, investigating whether there were connections between political changes and economic and social developments. It was soon realized that while there were links, these were not always simple or direct. Inscriptions. Inscriptions are writings engraved on hard surfaces such as stone, metal, or pottery. They usually record the achievements, activities, or ideas of those who commissioned them and include the exploits of kings or donations made by women and men to religious institutions. Inscriptions are virtually permanent records, some of which carry dates, others are dated on the basis of paleography or styles of writing with a fair amount of precision. For instance, in c. 250 BCE, the letter A was written like this. By c. 500 CE, it was written like this. The earliest inscriptions were in Prakrit, a name for language used by ordinary people. Names of rulers such as Ajatasattu and Asoka, known from Prakrit text and inscriptions, have been spelled in their Prakrit forms in this chapter. You will also find terms in language such as Pali, Tamil, and Sanskrit, which too were used to write inscription and text. It is possible that people spoke in other languages as well, even though these were not used for writing. The earliest states. The 16 Mahajanpadas. The 6th century BC is often regarded as a major turning point in early Indian history. It is an era associated with early states, cities, the growing use of iron, the development of coinage, etc. It also witnessed the growth of diverse systems of thought, including Buddhism and Jainism. Early Buddhist and Jaina texts, see also chapter 4, mention, amongst other things, 16 states known as Mahajanapadas. Although the list vary from some names such as Baji, Magadha, Kosala, Kuru, Panchara, Gandhara, and Avanti occur frequently. Clearly, these were amongst the most important Mahajanapadas. While most Mahajanapadas were ruled by kings, some known as Ganas or Sanghas were oligarchies where power was shared by a major number of men, often collectively called Rajas. Both Mahavira and the Buddha belonged to such Ganas. In some instances, as in the case of the Bhaji Sangha, the Rajas probably controlled resources such as land collectively. Although their histories are often difficult to reconstruct due to lack of sources, some of these states lasted for nearly 1,000 years. Each Mahajanapada had a capital city which was often fortified. Maintaining these fortified cities as well as providing for incipient armies and bureaucracies required resources. Janapada means the land where a jana, a people, clan, or tribe, sets its foot or settles. It is a word used in both Prakrit and Sanskrit. From 6th From 6th century BCE onwards, Brahmanas began composing Sanskrit texts known as the Dharma Sutras. These laid down norms for rulers as well as for other social categories who were ideally expected to be Kshatriyas. Rulers were advised to collect taxes and tribute from cultivators, traders, and artisans, where resources also procured from pastoralists and forest peoples. We do not really know. What we do know is that raids on neighboring states were recognized as a legitimate means of acquiring wealth. Gradually, some states acquiring standing armies and maintained regular bureaucracies. Others continued to depend on militia recruited more often than not from the peasantry. Oligarchy refers to a form of government where power is exercised by a group of men. The Roman Republic, about which you read last year, was an oligarchy in spite of its name. First amongst the 16, Magadha. Between the 6th and the 4th centuries BCE, Magadha in present-day Bihar became the most powerful Mahajanapada. Modern historians explain this development in a variety of ways. Magadha was a region where agriculture was especially productive. Besides, iron mines in present-day Jharkhand were accessible and provided resources for tools and weapons. Elephants, an important component of army, were found in forests in the region. Also, the Ganga and its tributaries provided a means of cheap and convenient communication. However, early Buddhist and Jaina writers who wrote about Magadha attributed its power to the policies of individuals, ruthlessly ambitious kings, of whom Bimbisara, Ajatasattu, and Mahapadmananda are the best known, and their ministers who helped implement their policies. Initially, Rajagaha, the Prakrit name for the present-day Rajgir in Bihar, was the capital of Magadha. Interestingly, the old name means house of the king. Rajagaha was a fortified settlement located amongst hills. Later in the 4th century BCE, the capital was shifted to Patliputra, present-day Patna, commanding routes of communication along the Ganga. Language and scripts. Most Ashokan inscriptions were in Prakrit language, while those in the northwest of the subcontinent were in Aramaic and Greek. Most Prakrit inscriptions were written in the Brahmi script. However, some in the northwest were written in Kharoshthi. The Aramaic and Greek scripts were used for inscription in Afghanistan. An early empire. The growth of Magadha culminated in the emergence of the Mauryan Empire. Chandragupta Maurya, who founded the empire, extended control as far as northwest as Afghanistan and Balochistan, and his grandson Asoka, arguably the most famous ruler of early India, conquered Kalinga, present-day coastal Odisha. Finding out about the Mauryas. Historians have used a variety of sources to reconstruct the history of the Mauryan Empire. This includes archaeological finds, especially sculpture. Also valuable are contemporary works such as the account of Megasthenes, a Greek ambassador to the court of Chandragupta Maurya, which survives in fragments. Another source that is often used is the Arthashastra, parts of which were probably composed by Kautilya or Chanakya, traditionally believed to be the minister of Chandragupta. Besides, the Mauryas are mentioned in later Buddhist, Jain, and Puranic literature as well as in Sanskrit literary works. While these are useful, the inscriptions of Asoka 272 by 268 to 231 BCE on rocks and pillars are often regarded amongst the most valuable resources. Asoka was the first ruler who inscribed his messages to his subjects and officials on stone surfaces, natural rocks, as well as polished pillars. He used the inscriptions to proclaim what he understood to be Dhamma. This included respect towards elders, generosity towards Brahmanas and those who renounced worldly life, treating slaves and servants kindly, and respect for religions and tradition other than one's own. Administering the empire. There were five major political centers in the empire: the capital Patliputra and the provincial center of Taxila, Ujjaini, Tosali, and Suvarnagiri, all mentioned in Asokan inscription. If we examine the content of this inscription, we find virtually the same message engraved everywhere, from the present northwest frontier province of Pakistan to Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, and Uttarakhand in India. Could this vast empire have had a uniform administrative system? Historians have increasingly come to realize that this is unlikely. The regions included within the empire were just too diverse. Imagine the contrast between the hilly terrain of Afghanistan and the coast of Odisha. It is likely that administrative control was strongest in areas around the capital and the provincial centers. These centers were carefully chosen, both Taxila and Ujjaini being situated on important long distance trade routes, while Suvarnagiri, literally the Golden Mountain, was possibly important for tapping the gold mines of Karnataka. Communication along both land and riverine routes was vital for the existence of the empire. Journeys from the center to the province could have taken weeks, if not months. This meant arranging for provisions as well as protection for those who were on the move. It is obvious that the army was an important means for ensuring the latter. Megasthenes mentions a committee with six subcommittees for coordinating military activity. Of these, one looked after the navy, the second managed transport and provisions, the third was responsible for foot soldiers, the fourth for horses, the fifth for chariots, and the sixth for elephants. The activities of the second subcommittee were rather varied, arranging for bullock carts to carry equipment, procuring food for soldiers and fodder for animals, and recruiting servants and artisans to look after the soldiers. Asoka also tried to hold his empire together by propagating Dhamma, the principles of which, as we have seen, were simple and virtually universally applicable. This, according to him, would ensure the well being of people in this world, and the next special officers, known as the Dhamma Mahamata, were appointed to spread the message of Dhamma. What the king's officials did. Here is an excerpt from the account of Megasthenes. Of the great officers of state, some superintend the rivers, measure the land as is done in Egypt, and inspect the sluices by which Water is let out from the main canal into their branches so that everyone may have an equal supply of it. The same person have charge also of the huntsmen and are entrusted with the power of rewarding or punishing them according to their deserts. They collect the taxes and superintend the occupations connected with land, as those of the woodcutters, the carpenters, the blacksmiths, and the miners. How important was the empire? When historians began reconstructing early Indian history in the 9th century, the emergence of the Mauryan Empire was regarded as a major landmark. India was then under colonial rule and was part of the British Empire. 19th and early 20th century Indian historians found the possibility that there was an empire in early India, both challenging and exciting. Also, some of the archaeological finds associated with the Mauryas, including stone sculpture, were considered to be examples of the spectacular art typical of empires. Many of these historians found the message on Ashoka inscription very different from that of most other rulers, suggesting that Ashoka was more powerful and industrious, as also more humble than later rulers who adopted grandiose titles. So it is not surprising that nationalist leaders in the 20th century regarded him as an inspiring figure. Yet, how important was the Mauryan Empire? It lasted for about 150 years, which is not a very long time in the vast span of the history of the subcontinent. Besides, if you look at map 2, you will notice that the empire did not encompass the entire subcontinent, and even within the frontiers of the empire, control was not uniform. By the 2nd century BCE, new chiefdoms and kingdoms emerged in several parts of the subcontinent. Capturing elephants for the army. The Arthashastra lays down minute details of administrative and military organization. This is what it says about how to capture elephants. Guards of elephants forest, assisted by those who rear elephants, those who unchain the legs of elephants, those who guard the boundaries, those who live in forest, as well as by those who nurse elephants, sell with the help of 5 or 7 female elephants to help in tethering wild ones, trace the whereabouts of herds of elephants by following the course of urine and dung left by elephants. According to Greek sources, the Mauryan ruler had a standing army of 600,000 foot soldiers, 30,000 cavalry, and 9,000 elephants. Some historians consider these accounts to be exaggerated. New notions of kingship, chiefs and kings in the south. The new kingdoms that emerged in the Deccan and further south, including the chiefdoms of the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas in Tamilakam, the same name of the ancient Tamil country, which included parts of present day Andhra Pradesh and Kerala, in addition to Tamil Nadu, proved to be stable and prosperous. Chiefs and chiefdoms. A chief is a powerful man whose position may or may not be hereditary. He derives support from his kinfolk. His function may include performing special rituals, leadership in warfare, and arbitrating disputes. He receives gifts from his subordinates, unlike kings who usually collect taxes and often distribute these amongst his supporters. Generally, there are no regular armies and officials in chiefdoms. We know about these days from a variety of sources. For instance, the early Tamil Sangam text contained poems describing chiefs and the ways in which they acquired and distributed resources. Many chiefs and kings, including the Satavahanas, who ruled over parts of western and central India, 2nd century BC, 2nd century CE, and the Sakas, a people of Central Asian origin, who established kingdoms in the northwestern and western parts of the subcontinent, derived revenues from long distance trade. Their social origins were often obscure, but as we will see in the case of the Satavahanas, once they acquired power, they attempted to claim social status in a variety of ways. Divine kings. One means of claiming high status was to identify with a variety of deities. This strategy is best exemplified by the Kusanas, 1st century BCE to 1st century CE, who ruled over a vast kingdom extending from Central Asia to northwest India. Their history has been reconstructed from inscriptions and textual tradition. The notions of kingship they wish to project are perhaps best evidenced in their coins and sculpture. Colossal statues of Kusana rulers have been found installed in a shrine at Math near Mathura, Uttar Pradesh. Similar statues have been found in a shrine in Afghanistan as well. Some historians feel this indicates that the Kusanas considered themselves godlike. Many Kusana rulers also adopted the title Devaputra or son of God, possibly inspired by Chinese rulers who called themselves sons of heaven. By the 4th century, there is evidence of larger states, including the Gupta Empire. Many of these depended on Samantas, men who maintained themselves through local resources, including control over land. They offered homage and provided military support to rulers. Powerful Samantas could become kings. Conversely, weak rulers might find themselves being reduced to position of subordination. Histories of the Gupta rulers have been reconstructed from literature, coins, and inscriptions, including prahastis, composed in praise of kings in particular and patrons in general by poets. While historians often attempt to draw factual information from such composition, those who composed and read them often treasured them as works of poetry rather than as accounts that were literally true. The Prayaga Prahasti, also known as Allahabad Pillar inscription, composed in Sanskrit by Harisena, the court poet of Samudragupta, arguably the most powerful of the Gupta rulers, 4th century CE, is a case in point. The Pandya chief Senguthavan visits the forest. This is an excerpt from the Silapadikaram, an epic written in Tamil. When he visited the forest, people came down the mountain singing and dancing, just as the defeated show respect to the victorious king. So did they bring gifts, ivory, fragrant woods, fans made of the hair of deer, honey, sandalwood, red ochre, antimony, turmeric, cardamom, pepper, etc. They brought coconuts, mangoes, medicinal plants, fruits, onions, sugarcane, flowers, areca nut, bananas, baby tigers, lions, elephants, monkeys, bear, deer, musk, deer, fox, peacocks, muscat, wild cocks, speaking parrot, etc. In praise of Samudragupta. This is an excerpt from the Prayaga Prahasti. He was without an antagonist on earth. He, by the overflowing of the multitude of his many good qualities, adorned by hundreds of good actions, has wiped off the fame of other kings with the soles of his feet. He is Purusa, the supreme being the cause of the prosperity of the good and the destruction of the bad. He is incomprehensible. He is one whose tender heart can be captured only by devotion and humility. He is possessed of compassion. He is the giver of many hundred thousands of cows. His mind has received ceremonial initiation for the uplift of the miserable, the poor, the forlorn, and the suffering. He is resplendent and embodied kindness to mankind. He is equal to the gods. Kubera, the god of wealth, Varuna, the god of the ocean, Indra, the god of rains, and Yama, the god of death. A changing countryside. Popular perceptions of kings. What did subjects think about their rulers? Obviously, inscriptions do not provide all the answer. In fact, ordinary people rarely left accounts of their thoughts and experiences. Nevertheless, historians have tried to solve this problem by examining stories contained in the anthologies such as the Jatakas and the Panchatantra. Many of these stories probably originated as popular oral tales that were later co- committed to writing. The Jatakas were written in Pali around the middle of the first millennium CE. One story known as the Gandhatindu Jataka describes the plight of the subject of a wicked king. These included elderly women and men, cultivators, herders, village boys, and even animals. When the king went in disguise to find out what his subjects thought about him. Each one of them cursed him for their miseries, complaining that they were attacked by robbers at night and by tax collectors during the day. To escape from this situation, people abandoned their village and went to live in the forest. As this story indicates, the relationship between a king and his subjects, especially the rural population, could often be strained. Kings frequently tried to fill their coffers by demanding high taxes, and peasants particularly found such demands oppressive. Escaping into the forest remained an option, as reflected in the Jataka story. Meanwhile, other strategies aimed at increasing production to meet growing demand for taxes also came to be adopted. The Sudarsana, beautiful lake in Gujarat. Find Ginnar on map 2. The Sudarsana Lake was an artificial reservoir. We know about it from a rock inscription, 2nd century CE, in Sanskrit, composed to record the achievement of the Saka ruler Rudra Damana. The inscription mentions that the lake with embankments and water channels was built by a local governor during the rule of the Mauryas. However, a terrible storm broke the embankments and water gushed out of the lake. Rudradamana, who was then ruling in the area, claimed to have got the lake repaired using his own resources without imposing any tax on his subjects. Another inscription on the same rock, 5th century, mentions how one of the rulers of the Gupta dynasty got the lake repaired once again. Strategies for increasing production. One such strategy was the shift to plug agriculture, which spread in fertile alluvial river valleys such as those of the Ganga and the Kaveri from 6th century BCE. The iron-tipped plug share was used to turn the alluvial soil in areas which had high rainfall. Moreover, in some parts of the Ganga Valley, production of paddy was dramatically increased by the introduction of transplantation, although this meant back-breaking work for the producer. While the iron plug share led to the growth in agricultural productivity, its use was restricted to certain parts of the subcontinent. Cultivators in areas which were semi-arid, such as parts of Punjab and Rajasthan, did not adopt it till the 20th century, and those living in hilly tracts in the northeastern and central parts of the subcontinent practiced hop agriculture, which was much better suited to the terrain. Another strategy adopted to increase agricultural production was the use of irrigation through wells and tanks, and less commonly canals. communities as well as individuals organized the construction of irrigation work. The latter, usually powerful men, including kings, often recorded such activities in inscription. The importance of boundaries. The Manusmriti is one of the best known legal texts of early India, written in Sanskrit and compiled between 2nd century BCE and 2nd century CE. This is what the text advises the kings to do. Seeing that in the world controversies constantly arise due to the ignorance of boundaries, he should have concealed boundaries, markers buried, stones, bones, cows' hair, sap, ashes, potsherds, dried cow dung, bricks, coal, pebbles, and sand. He should also have other similar substances that would not decay in the soil, buried as hidden markers at the intersection of boundaries. Differences in rural society. While these technologies often led to an increase in production, the benefits were very uneven. What is evident is that there was a growing differentiation amongst people engaged in agriculture. Stories, especially within the Buddhist tradition, refer to landless agricultural laborers, small peasants, as well as large landholders. The term Gahapati was often used in Pali text to designate the second and third categories. The large landholders, as well as the village headmen, whose position was often hereditary, emerged as powerful figures and often exercised control over other cultivators. Early Tamil literature, the Sangam text, also mentioned different categories of people living in the villages. Large landowners or veller, plugmen or usavar, and slaves or adimai. It is likely that these differences were based on differential access to land, labor, and some of the new technologies. In such a situation, question of control over land must have become crucial, as these were often discussed in legal text. Gahapati. A Gahapati was the owner, master, or head of a household who exercised control over the women, children, slaves, and workers who shared a common residence. He was also the owner of the resources, land, animal, and other things that belonged to the household. Sometimes the term was used as a marker of status for men belonging to the urban elite, including wealthy merchants. Life in a small village. The Harsacharita is a biography of Harsavardhana, the ruler of Kannauj, composed in Sanskrit by his court poet Banavhatta. This is an excerpt from the text, an extremely rare representation of life in a settlement on the outskirts of the forest in the Vindhyas. The outskirts being for the most part of forest, many parcels of rice land, threshing ground, and arable land were being apportioned by small farmers. It was mainly spade culture. Owing to the difficulty of plowing, the sparsely scattered fields covered with grass, with their few clear spaces, their black soil stiff as black iron. There were people moving along the bundles of bars, countless sacks of plucked flowers, loads of flax and hemp bundles, quantities of honey, peacocks, tail feathers, reeds of wax, logs, and grass. Village wives hastened en route for neighboring villages, all intent on thoughts of sale and bearing on their heads baskets filled with various gathered forest fruits. Land grants and new rural elites. From the early centuries of the Common Era, we find grants on land being made, many of which were recorded in inscriptions. Some of these inscriptions were on stone, but most were on copper plates, which were probably given as a record of the transaction to those who received the land. The records that have survived are generally about grants to religious institutions or to Brahmanas. Most inscriptions were in Sanskrit. In some cases, and especially from the 7th century onwards, part of the inscription was in Sanskrit while the rest was in local languages such as Tamil or Telugu. Let us look at one such inscription more closely. Prabhavati Gupta was the daughter of one of the most important rulers in the early Indian history, Chandragupta II. She was married into another important ruling family, that of the Bakatakas, who were powerful in the Deccan. According to Sanskrit legal text, women were not supposed to have independent access to resources such as land. However, the inscription indicates that Prabhavati had access to land which she then granted. This may have been because she was a queen, one of the few known from early Indian history, and her situation was therefore exceptional. It is also possible that the provisions of legal text were not uniformly implemented. The inscription also gives us an idea about rural population. This included Brahmanas and peasants, as well as others who were accepted to provide a range of produce to the king or his representatives. And according to the inscription, they would have to obey the new lord of the village and perhaps pay him all these dues. Land grants such as this one have been found in several parts of the country. There were regional variation in the sizes of land donated, ranging from small plots to vast stretches of uncultivated land, and the rights given to donees, the recipient of the grant. The impact of land grants is a subject of heated debate among historians. Some feel that land grants were part of a strategy adopted by ruling lineages to extend agriculture to new areas. Others suggest that land grants were indicative of weakening political power as kings were losing control over their samantas. They tried to win allies by making grants of lands. They also feel that kings tried to project themselves as supermen, as we saw in the previous section. Because they were losing control, they wanted to present at least a facade of power. An agrahara was land granted to a brahmana who was usually exempted from paying land revenue and other dues to the king, and was often given the right to collect these dues from the local people. Prabhavati Gupta and the village of Danguna. This is what Prabhavati Gupta states in her inscription. Prabhavati Gupta commands the Grama Kutumbinas, householders or peasants living in the village, Brahmanas and others living in the village of Danaguna. Be it known to you that on the 12th lunar day of the bright fortnight of Kartika, we have, in order to increase our religious merit, donated this village with the pouring out of water to the Acharya teacher Chanala Samin. You should obey all his commands. We confer on him the following exceptions typically of an agrahara. This village is not to be entered by soldiers and policemen. It is exempt from the obligation to provide grass, animal hides as seeds, and charcoal to touring royal officers. Exempt from the royal prerogative of purchasing fermenting liquids and digging salt. Exempt from the right to mines and khadira trees. Exempt from the obligation to supply flowers and mills. It is donated together with the right to hidden treasures and deposits, and together with major and minor taxes. This charter has been written in the 13th regnal year. It has been engraved by Chakradasa. Land grants provide some insight into the relationship between cultivators and the state. However, there were people who were often beyond the reach of official or samantas. Pastoralists, fisherfolk, and hunter-gatherers, mobile or semi-sedentary artisans, and shifting cultivators. Generally, such groups did not detail records of their lives and transactions. The history of Patliputra. Each city had a history of its own. Patliputra, for instance, began as a village known as Patligrama. Then, in the 5th century BCE, the Magadhan ruler decided to shift their capital from Rajagaha to this settlement and renamed it. By the 4th century BCE, it was the capital of the Mauryan Empire and one of the largest cities in Asia. Subsequently, its importance apparently declined when the Chinese pilgrim Juan Zhang visited the city in the 7th century BCE. He found it in ruins and with a very small population. Towns and trades. New cities. Let us retrace our steps back to the urban centers that emerged in several parts of the subcontinent from 6th century BCE. As we have seen, many of these were capitals of Mahajanapadas. Virtually all major towns were located along routes of communication. Some, such as Patliputra, were on riverine routes, others, such as Ujjaini, were along the land routes, and yet others, such as Puhar, were near the coast, from where sea routes began. Many cities like Mathura were bustling centers of commercial, cultural, and political activity. Urban population, elites, and craftspersons. We have seen that kings and ruling elites lived in fortified cities. Although it is difficult to conduct extensive excavation at most cities because people live in these areas even today, unlike the Harappan cities, a wide range of artifacts have been recovered from them. This includes fine pottery bowls and dishes with a glossy finish known as northern black polished ware, probably used by rich people, and ornaments, tools, weapons, vessels, figurines made of a wide range of material: gold, silver, copper, bronze, ivory, glass, cell, and terracotta. By the 2nd century BCE, we find sword votive inscription in a number of cities. These mention the name of the donor and sometimes specify his or her occupation as well. They tell us about people who lived in towns: washing folk, weavers, scribes, carpenters, potters, goldsmiths, blacksmiths, officials, religious teachers, merchants, and kings. Sometimes guilds or shrenis, organization of craft producers and merchants, are mentioned as well. These guilds probably procured raw material, regulated production, and marketed the finished product. It is likely that craftspersons used a range of iron tools to meet the growing demands of urban elites. Votive inscriptions record gifts made to religious institutions. Trade in the subcontinent and beyond. From the 6th century BCE, land and river routes crossed the subcontinent and extended in various directions, overland into Central Asia and beyond, and overseas from ports that dotted the coastline extending across the Arabian Sea to East and North Africa and West Asia, and through the Bay of Bengal to Southeast Asia and China. Rulers often attempted to control this route, possibly by offering protection for a price. Those who traversed these routes included peddlers who probably traveled on foot and merchants who traveled with caravans of bullock carts and pack animals. Also, there were seafarers whose ventures were risky but highly profitable. Successful merchants, designated as Mastavahana in Tamil and Sethis in Satavahanas in Prakrit, could become enormously rich. A wide range of goods were carried from one place to another: salt, grain, cloth, metal ores, and finished products, stone, timber, medicinal plants, to name a few. Spices, especially pepper, were in high demand in the Roman Empire, as were textile and medicinal plant, and these were all transported across the Arabian Sea to the Mediterranean. The Malabar coast, present-day Kerala. Here is an excerpt from Periplus of the Aegean Sea, composed by anonymous Greek seller. They, that means traders from abroad, sent large ships to these market towns on account of the great quantity and bulk of pepper and malvatrum, possibly cinnamon, produced in these regions. These are important here in the first place: a great quantity of coin, topaz, antimony, a mineral used as coloring substance, coral, tuned glass, copper, tin, lead, There is exported paper which is produced in quantity in only one region near these markets. Besides these, there are exported great quantities of fine pearls, ivory, silk, cloth, transparent stones of all kinds, diamonds and sapphires, and tortoise shells. Archaeological evidence of a bead making industry using precious and semi precious stones has been found in Kodumanal, Tamil Nadu. It is likely that local traders brought the stones mentioned in the periplus from sites such as these to the coastal ports. Periplus is a Greek word meaning sailing around, and Archean was the Greek name for the Red Sea. Coins and kings. To some extent, exchanges were facilitated by the introduction of coinage. Punchmark coins made of silver and copper were amongst the earliest to be minted and used. These have been recovered from excavation at a number of sites throughout the subcontinent. Numismatists have studied these and other coins to reconstruct possible commercial networks. Attempts made to identify the symbols on punchmark coins with specific ruling dynasties, including the Mauryas, suggest that these were issued by kings. It is also likely that merchants, bankers, and townspeople issued some of these coins. The first coin to bear the names and images of rulers were issued by the Indo Greeks, who established control over the northwestern part of the subcontinent. The first gold coins were issued 1st century CE by the Kusanas. These were virtually identical in weight with those issued by contemporary Roman emperors and the Parthian rulers of Iran, and have been found from several sites in North India and Central Asia. The widespread use of gold coins indicates the enormous value of the transactions that were taking place. Besides, hoards of Roman coins have been found from archaeological sites in South India. It is obvious that networks of trades were not confined within political boundaries. South India was not part of the Roman Empire, but there were close connections through trade. Numismatics is the study of coins, including visual elements such as scripts and images, metrological analysis, and context in which they have been found. Coins were also issued by tribal republics and as that of the Yodhas of Punjab and Haryana. Archaeologists have unearthed several thousand copper coins issued by the Yodhas, pointing to the latter's interest and participation in economic exchanges. Some of the most spectacular gold coins were issued by the Gupta rulers. The earliest issues are remarkable for their purity. These coins facilitated long distance transactions from which kings also benefited. From 6th century CE onwards, finds of gold coins taper off. Thus, this indicates that there was some kind of an economic crisis. Historians are divided on this issue. Some suggest that with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, long distance trade declined, and this affected the prosperity of the states, communities, and regions that had benefited from it. Others argue that new towns and networks of trade started emerging around this time. They also point out that though finds of coins of that time are fewer, coins continue to be mentioned in inscriptions and text. Could it be that there are fewer finds because coins were in circulation rather than being hoarded? Back to basic. How are inscriptions deciphered? So far, we have been studying excerpts from inscription amongst other things. But how do historians find out what is written on them? Deciphering Brahmi. Most scripts used to write modern Indian languages are derived from Brahmi, the script used in most Ashokan inscriptions. From the late 18th century, European scholars, aided by Indian Pandits, worked backwards from contemporary Bengali and Devanagari, the script used to write Hindi manuscript, comparing their letters with older specimens. Scholars who studied early inscriptions sometimes assumed these were in Sanskrit, although the earliest inscriptions were, in fact, in Prakrit. It was only after decades of painstaking investigation by several epigraphists that James Prinsep was able to decipher Ashokan Brahmi in 1838. How Kharoshthi was read. The story of the decipherment of Kharoshthi, the script used in inscription in the northwest, is different. Here, finds of coins of Indo-Greek kings who ruled over the area have facilitated matters. These coins contains the name of kings written in Greek and Kharoshthi scripts. European scholars who could read the former compare the letters. For instance, the symbol for A could be found in both scripts for writing names such as Apollodotus. With Prinsep identifying the language of the Kharoshthi inscriptions as Prakrit, it became possible to read longer inscriptions as well. The orders of the kings. Thus speaks King Devanapiyadasi. In the past, there were no arrangements for disposing affairs nor for receiving regular reports. But I have made the following arrangement. Pativedakas should report to me about the affairs of the people at all times, anywhere, whether I am eating in the inner apartment, in the bedroom, in the cow pen being carried possibly in a palanquin, or in the garden, and I will dispose of the affairs of the people everywhere. Historical evidence from inscriptions. To find out how epigraphists and historians work, let us look at two Ashokan inscriptions more closely. Note that the name of the ruler Ashoka is not mentioned in the inscription. What is used instead are titles adopted by the ruler. Devanapaya, often translated as beloved of the gods, and Piyadasi, or pleasant to behold. The name Ashoka is mentioned in some other inscriptions, which also contains these titles. After examining all these inscriptions and finding that they match in terms of content, style, language, and paleography, epigraphists have concluded that they were issued by the same ruler. You may also have noticed that Ashoka claims that earlier rulers had no arrangement to receive reports. If you consider the political history of the subcontinent prior to Ashoka, do you think this statement is true? Historians have to constantly assess statements made in inscriptions to judge whether they are true, plausible, or exaggerations. Did you notice that there are words within brackets? Epigraphists sometimes add these to make the meaning of sentence clear. This has to be done carefully to ensure that the intended meaning of the author is not changed. Historians have to make other assessments as well. If a king's order were inscribed on natural rocks near cities or important routes of communication, would passers-by have stopped to read this? Most people were probably not literate. Did everybody throughout the subcontinent understand the Prakrit used in Patliputra? Would the orders of the king have been followed? Answers to such questions are not always easy to find. Some of these problems are evident if we look at an Ashokan inscription, which has often been interpreted as reflecting the anguish of the ruler as well as marking a change in his attitude towards warfare. As we shall see, the situation becomes more complex once we move beyond reading the inscription at face value. While Ashokan inscriptions have been found in present-day Odisha, the one depicting his anguish is missing. In other words, the inscription has not been found in the region that was conquered. What are we to make of that? Is it that the anguish of the recent conquest was too painful in the region and therefore the ruler was unable to address the issue? The anguish of the king. When the king Devanapaya Piyadasi had been ruling for 8 years, the country of the Kalingas, present-day coastal Orissa, was conquered by him. 150,000 men were deported, 100,000 were killed, and many more died. After that, now that the country of the Kalingas has been taken, Devanappiya is devoted to an intense study of Dhamma, to the love of Dhamma, and to instructing the people in Dhamma. This is a repentance of Devanappiya on account of his conquest of the country of the Kalingas. For this is considered very painful and deplorable by Devanappiya that while one is conquering an unconquered country, slaughter, death, and deportation of people take place there. The limitations of inscriptional evidence. By now, it is probably evident that there are limits to what epigraphy can reveal. Sometimes there are technical limitations, letters are very faintly engraved, and thus the reconstructions are uncertain. Also, inscriptions may be damaged or letters missing. Besides, it is not always easy to be sure about the exact meaning of the words used in the inscriptions. Some of which may be specific to a particular place or time. If you go through an epigraphical journal, you will realize that scholars are constantly debating and discussing alternative ways of reading inscriptions. Although several thousand inscriptions have been discovered, not all have been deciphered, published, and translated. Besides, many more inscriptions must have existed which has not survived the ravages of time. So, what is available at present is probably only a fraction of what was inscribed. There is another, perhaps more fundamental problem. Not everything that we may consider politically or economically significant was necessarily recorded in inscription. For instance, routine agricultural practices and the joys and sorrows of daily existence find no mention in inscription, which focus more often than not on grand, unique events. Besides, the content of the inscription almost invariably projects the perspective of the person who commissioned them. As such, they need to be juxtaposed with other perspectives so as to arrive at a better understanding of the past. Thus, epigraphy alone does not provide a full understanding of political and economic history. Also, historians often question both old and new evidence. Scholars in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were primarily interested in the histories of kings. From the mid 20th century onwards, issues such as economic change and the ways in which different social groups emerged have assumed far more importance. Recent decades have seen a much greater preoccupation with the histories of marginalized groups. This will probably lead to fresh investigation of old sources and the development of new strategies of analysis. तो यह है टाइमलाइन 1 जिसमें मेजर पॉलिटिकल एंड इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट दिखाया गया है, और यह है टाइमलाइन 2 जिसमें मेजर एडवांसेस इन एपिग्राफी दिखाया गया है, और यह है इस चैप्टर का एक्सरसाइज। आप चाहे तो ये भी सॉल्व कर सकते हैं। और आज के लिए हमारा चैप्टर इतना ही था। आज की वीडियो के लिए इतना ही। थैंक यू, थैंक्स फॉर ज्वाइनिंग।